Hello everyone and welcome to Off the Press. I'm Tokunbo Taiwo. Thank you very much for sharing a very busy news day with us. With me this morning to discuss major headlines on the dailies is he's actually a political analyst, Lolu Elegbe. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Good morning to you. Was there so much of a traffic this morning? Or?
No, it actually wasn't bad.
Okay, and how was the weather? Was it raining by the time you came? Drizzling. Yeah. Okay. And are you happy it's drizzling, considering the heat in the last week or last month or so?
Well, I found it doesn't make that much of a difference. It's
really?
Still, yeah, it's
so the global warming
kind of
thing
deceptive.
is okay.
That's my view.
Yes. Okay. No problem. Let's dig right in. We've got a number of newspapers today. We've got This Day, Daily Independent. We've also got Vanguard. We've got The Nation. So there's a lot of headlines and a number of stories. And I'm hoping we'll be able to do justice to all of the newspapers before the end of the program. Okay. We'll start with This Day. I'll just quickly take us through the major headlines, and then we'll select the major headline and discuss that in a little bit of detail.
Okay.
We'll start at the very top of This Day newspapers. Hundreds missing as bandits block Kaduna-Abuja highway. There's a rider underneath that story. UBEC chairman, daughter kidnapped. The full story is available on page 8. Underneath that, we've got Nigeria's population now 201 million, says UN. That story is on page 9. Okay, there's... in the middle of the newspaper, we've got a photograph for good governance. That's what it's titled. Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, Senate President, Dr. Bukola Saraki. That's their photo in the middle there with the Vice President as well. And next to that picture, we've got PDP accuses INEC of doctoring servers. The story is continued on page 6. Now, the major headline at the bottom of This Day newspaper is brace for new minimum wage payment. Osinbajo tells governors and asks for collaboration with the federal government on security. And next to that is another rider that says Yari warns on looming economic crisis. The details are available on page 8. At the bottom of This Day, we've got Fashola seeks elongation of works minister's tenure. That story is on page 6. Let's see what's available behind on This Day. Tuesday with Ruben Abati, a private visit to Her Majesty the Queen. And I think he's referring to Buhari here. Okay, if you want to find out more about that, grab a copy of This Day. Let's go back onto the front page of This Day. The major headline is brace for new minimum wage payment, Osinbajo tells governors. Okay, let me ask for your initial reaction on this, Lolu. What say you?
Yeah, so I think this was coming off the back of, they call it an induction they had for new governors and re-elected governors yesterday. I think it was yesterday. It's
Were you there by any chance? Because the way you say it, I was like...
No, because I sort of followed it yesterday when they were talking about it. And it seemed quite... I'm not sure if the word, if I'm using the right word when I say funny, because the minimum wage bill has been passed into law already.
Are you trying to be politically correct?
No, I'm the least politically correct person. It's just because, I mean, we've been talking about the minimum wage for a while now. Now it's law. Now it has to be paid, which means that paying anyone anything less than that is illegal. But we all know that even before it was signed into law, a lot of governors were kicking against it because according to them, if they were struggling to pay 18,000, how on earth would they afford 30,000? Which, on the surface of it, seems like it makes sense. But I've always questioned why it's so hard for the state to pay salaries. We get that. Of course, I get that not all states are the same in terms of revenue. And those sorts of things. But I think the fact that we have this federal allocation thing, I think it's led to a lazy mentality in terms of innovative ways of generating revenues for the states. If we take Lagos State as an example, Lagos obviously leads the way in terms of internally generated revenue. But if we look back just over a decade ago, Lagos was sort of forced to do that because of the issue that then President Obasanjo had with then Governor Tinubu. where he refused to release the federal allocation, and Lagos had to look for other ways of raising money. And that's turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because Lagos can pretty much survive on its own without that federal allocation. So my point is, other states at that time, even now it's not too late, but should be looking at other ways to raise revenue. They don't have to wait until there's someone in Aso Rock who doesn't give them the allocation and then they start looking for it. It doesn't make any sense to me that the only way states can pay, whether it's minimum wage or anything else, or even generate any kind of revenue, is coming directly from the federal government. Okay. Every state in this country has
let me ask you this.
To offer.
In terms of the states, do you think they should cut down costs on so many of their own other budgets so as to meet this minimum wage?
Of course. I mean, if you're trying to raise funds, there are two ways to do it. You either look for ways of generating revenue, so whether it's businesses, whatever it is, tax, or you cut costs, or you do a combination of both. So in these cases, from what we see, a lot of the salaries that come under the state seems to bloat every 4 years or every few years. And in a case where you have a state that hasn't paid salary maybe in 18 months or 12 months, and they still keep hiring people, what are you hiring them to do? How are you planning to pay the ones you're hiring afresh? It
doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
Okay, I need us to quickly touch on one more story before we move on to our newspaper. But because of time, I like for us to, be quick on this. It's the PDP accuses INEC of doctoring servers. Okay. What's your view on this? Again,
that's funny to me, because right now it just seems like the PDP just seems to be clutching at straws. They've thrown everything kitchen sink at both INEC and APC. Just to be able to show that what their belief is that Atiku Abubakar actually won the election.
Do you think they're sore losers, or they're just
of course they are. Of course they are. Because this doesn't make any sense. I'm involved in the IT industry, so I know that what they're talking about here absolutely it doesn't make any sense.
Okay, all right, we're going to leave that there and move on to our next newspaper, which is the Daily Independent. Let's go through the headlines, and I'll take the first one, which is the main headline right in the middle of the newspaper there. It's Senate orders Ene Lama, NEPSA MD, to return 14.3 billion naira. That's the main story. That's the main headline. It starts on the front page and continues on page 4. At the top of the Daily Independent, there are a number of stories right there, and we'll start in the top left-hand corner. Vote buying, military interference ruined 2019 polls. Observers, and INEC has replaced servers to conceal rigging, PDP alleges. That story is on page 4. Next to that, we've got 2,000 houses affected as family moves to reclaim Lagos Agidingbi land. That story is on page 41. And next to that headline is the next one. On the top right-hand corner, recession may hit Nigeria in 2020, says Yari, page 4. Okay, let's look at the bottom of the Daily Independent. Just towards the right, we've got the left, Nigeria's population now 201 million, says UN. We saw that story earlier on in the This Day newspaper as well. And just underneath that, we've got OPL 245. Nigeria loses $6 billion to IOCs annually. That's a report. And Amechi Akpabio meet and resolve differences, page 41. And the bottom right-hand corner, we've got UBEC chairman, daughter kidnapped, driver killed, page 41. And the last story on the Daily Independent at the very bottom is Buhari asked AGF to intervene in Saudi detained Zainab's case. That story is on page 5. Let's see if there's anything interesting on the back of Daily Independent. It's also another columnist talking about the issues at stake. And this time, Jerry Uwa talks about NMA and Ngige's incoherent argument. Okay, if you want to find out about that, grab a copy of the Daily Independent. Let's go back to the front page once again and see what stories are grabbing at our attention. Let's talk about the main headline first of all, and then we can discuss one or two of those stories. Senate orders Enelama, NEPSA MD, to return 14.3 billion naira. Do you think that makes sense? Is that a candid request, or you think a reasonable request, so to speak?
Well, It's one of those, again, that doesn't make much sense to me, because going by the story, what the Senate is essentially saying is that these funds were fraudulently diverted into private accounts. Now, if there were, I think they mentioned legislative action if that money is not returned. Now, by the law, if you fraudulently diverted funds, it becomes a criminal issue. So I'm not sure why the threat is a legislative one. It should be a criminal issue. If you have proof that these guys have done what you're saying, then this should be a police EFCC issue. I'm not sure
why. They don't
why.
have proof yet. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, but if they don't have proof, then why are they asking them to return it? Then what is it they're asking them to return if there's no proof?
It's not making sense, is it?
No, not to me.
Okay. All right, let's move on. Let's see. This looks like an interesting headline. UBEC chairman, daughter kidnapped and driver killed.
Yeah.
This is a sad story.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's particularly that Abuja-Kaduna highway. So much seems to be happening there not these days. It's been going on for quite a while, but it seems to have ramped up in the last few months. We keep getting assurances that, quote unquote, police are on top of it, the security agents are on top of it. But judging from this headline and others that we probably wouldn't even hear, or wouldn't, this probably made the newspapers because of the people that were kidnapped. And I think it's sad, like you said, but I'm not sure why it's that difficult to get this thing stopped. We have the security agents are there. I think when was it 2 years ago when there was a renovation going on at the Abuja airport and flights were being diverted to Kaduna, and then you'd have to take a shuttle bus from Kaduna to Abuja. The security there, a lot of people were apprehensive because of these kinds of issues, but security was apparently very good. The shuttle buses were escorted by police and those sorts of things. There were regular patrols. I'm not sure why that is not an ongoing thing in the face of something like this.
Maybe they should consider it.
I would say that.
All right. You're watching Off the Press. We're taking a quick break right now. When we return, we'll be handling 2 more newspapers. That'll be all after this quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Off the Press right here on Plus TV Africa, where the big stories live. We're just handling the different newspaper headlines, and we've got Vanguard next, and we've got the Nation newspaper as well. That should be before we round up. And here to sort of analyze the stories with us, we've got political analyst Lolu Elegbe once again, for those of you just joining us. Okay, so we're looking at Vanguard now, and the main headline on the Vanguard is a federal government falls UN agency over Nigeria's population figures. The riders underneath that headline is Nigeria's population now 201 million, says UN Population Fund. UNFPA report, mere assumption based on 2006 census NPC. Okay, let's look at the top before we go all the way down to the bottom. At the top, we've got a number of headlines as well. In the top left-hand corner, we've got traders shun toxic more selling in Lagos. That story is on page 10. And underneath that, we've got also in the top left-hand corner, 2023 general elections, INEC Army, NSCDC clash over proposal for electronic voting. That story is on page 9. Next to that, we've got another recession looms by mid-2020, NGF warns. The details are available on page 41. And last but not least, on the right hand, in the top right-hand corner, we've got Onogen, Buhari not dictating how to run judiciary, Supreme Court. That story is on page 9. At the bottom of those stories, we've got CBN to establish collateral management regime for regulation of fintechs. That's on page 19. Let's look at the bottom of the Vanguard. There are a number of stories once again. And on the bottom left-hand corner, we've got Senate to pass 2019 budget today. That story is on page 9. And next to it, we've got Boko Haram fighters get $3,000, Nigerian troops 1,000 naira daily. President Presidential Committee. That story is on page 9. Next to that, we've got federal government bans study centers and satellite campuses, page 13. Underneath that, we've got narrative of Nigeria being a fraud destination must stop, NCAC boss, page 14 as well. Okay, I think that's enough now. Let's look at the main headline. FG falls UN agency over Nigeria's population figures. Most of the stories you've said they've sounded funny to you, don't make sense. What's your take on this? Funny or does it make sense?
This one actually agree with the federal government here.
Okay.
What doesn't make sense here is the criteria that the UN agency has used to come up with this number. First of all, our last census was in 2006, which is 13 years ago. I believe.
And in 2006, it was like 200 million at the time. Or do you have any recollection of how
I think
much
it was about 190.
90, yes, something like that. So in actual fact, it should have gone way up more than what the UN is proposing now.
Well, it's two things. For me, first of all, I don't believe that we're actually 190 in the first place. I think from the studies that I've done, based on the number of the populations in different states, I believe that at the most we were about 140, 150, I think. Again, I could be wrong on that.
How do you think, sorry to cut it there, but how do you think we can actually get the true measure of the census in terms of counting every single person? Let's not forget the fact that, you know, we haven't, in terms of landmass, Nigeria is quite huge. And then in terms of the localities as well, Nigeria has some remote places.
Absolutely.
So how does one take into, into consideration the full, or, instead of having an approximate or an estimate, how does one get the full confirmed census, really?
Well, to be honest, it has to be done. What we need to do, and I think we shouldn't be ashamed to ask for help. Other countries have done it and done it properly. We should not shy away from doing that, because if you think about the fact that the population figures have a direct impact on representation at the National Assembly and those sorts of things. So, which means by default, there are political consequences to those numbers. So this is one of the reasons you start to see figures that, if under closer scrutiny, don't really add up. But if you find a way of, there's really no way to take away the political aspect of it, because that's what representation is based on. But we need to get to a place where we're actually counting and saying, okay, this is how much. Yeah, and you're right, there's so many remote areas. But the same way we do elections, where we can get materials to those places, there's no reason why we can't do a census in those places, I think.
All right then, Lolu, we're going to leave that there because of time. Unfortunately, we've got just a few minutes left. So I really want us to touch on this, the nation, before we move on. And the major headline on the nation is Goje to Wamako Yari. I want to hear from Buhari. There's pressure on APC to zone Deputy Speaker to North Central. Wike PDP governors disagree over House Minority Leader. So because of time, I don't want to go through the whole newspaper. Let's just quickly talk on that, your initial take.
Okay, so obviously the APC have made a decision that the Senate, their choice for Senate President is Ahmed Lawan, who's I think is currently the House, the Majority Leader at the moment. And obviously there are two other candidates from the APC, I think Danjuma Goje and Aliun Dume. So there's pressure on both of them to step down for the party's choice, Senator Lawan. But Senator Goje seems to be saying, the implication of what he's saying is, I'll step down if President Buhari tells me to. Again, they're saying that, okay, maybe they will arrange a meeting with the both of them.
Do you have a problem with him saying that? Because you laughed before you even reacted.
Well, it's this idea that it's the idea of, or the illusion of separation of powers, because really the executive really should have no business in who the Senate votes in as Senate President, because there's supposed to be three distinct arms of government. So really the President shouldn't be influencing who becomes what in any of the, again, he nominates a Supreme Court justice anyway, so again there's a question of, is there any real separation of powers there?
All right, thank you very much, Lolu. That's where we're going to leave it because of time.
Sure.
We've been listening to Lolu Elegbe, political analyst, and that's how we're going to round up. Thank you very much for joining us on Off the Press today. If you really enjoyed the headlines and you thoroughly enjoyed the analysis, join us tomorrow. We'll be back precisely at the same time, 8:30 tomorrow. Don't miss it. I'm Tokunbo Taiwo saying good morning.